Hi again. So now we'll be talking about the perfect tense. And the perfect tense is actually very different from the other tenses, but fortunately it's also a lot easier to form since it doesn't require connecting vowels. Before learning the perfect passive though, it'll be really helpful to already be familiar with the present tense of assume, and I covered that in the irregular verbs video. But as usual, we'll start off with the active. And what makes the perfect so different from the other tenses is that it's taken from the third principal part instead of the second principal part. So let me give you an example, and let me move this over a little bit. It's out of the frame. Okay, so perfect is taken from the third principal part. And now I'll give you an example, or a dictionary entry, so that we can actually conjugate. Okay, and I'll do the one I've been doing: amo, amare, amawi, amatus. And it means to love. Okay, so the third principal part, as I mentioned, or the perfect tense, as I said, is actually very easy. And all you need to do is remove the I on your third principal part. So let's do that. Just cross off that I, and you're left with something that ends in a V. And that is your stem. So let's go ahead and do that. Let me write down the chart first, singular, plural. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, sorry. And then our stem, and it's a mauve. And this is why you make your chart first. It's kind of messy, sorry. Okay, so before I do that, I'll go ahead and give you the endings. And we draw our chart. And they're very different from all the other endings, so they'll actually be easier to remember. And it's E, easty, it, emus, easties, and erunt. Okay, so let's go ahead and conjugate. And all you do again is you add these endings right here onto the end of your stem, which we already went ahead and copied down. So it's just E, easty, it, emus, easties, and erunt. Okay, so the perfect is actually the equivalent of simple past if you've heard that before. And basically it can be translated in one of three ways. And let me go ahead and write that down right here. Translated, or translations. And you can just think of the perfect as past tense. And it's, I'll do it in a different color so it stands out more. It can be blanked, or it can be did blank, and finally it can be used to blank. And your verb would obviously go in that blank. So now we can move on to the passive, and the passive is actually very different. The passive exists as two words. So the way we usually start is to make your chart with all of your present tenses of assume already conjugated, but you should make sure to leave room for another word. So let's go ahead, make our chart, and I'll make it a little bit bigger this time so we have enough room to write down both words. I'm just going to go ahead and choose a different color. I'll go with orange, and let's conjugate assume in the present tense, and we'll do it as the second word because usually the other word comes first, but you'll see in a second. So it's assume, est, sumus, estis, sunt. And basically, let me change my color. And So now you're just going to go, and this time you're going to look at a new principal part. We've been working mostly with the first, second, and third, but here you can look at your fourth principal part, excuse me. And basically, this is where it gets tricky. What you have to do, let me just go ahead and write down the amatus right here. This is your fourth principal part. Amatus. And basically what you have to do is you have to cross off the US ending, and you have to use first, let me write it down, first and second declension adjective endings to match the number and the gender of your subject. So basically, your ending can be one of 6 endings, and it can be here. Let me make a new list. One of 6 endings for your first word or your fourth principal part, and the ending can be a or I because it is feminine singular nominative, or I because it is feminine plural nominative. It can be us, it can be e, and obviously that is the masculine singular nominative and the masculine plural nominative. And finally, you have a for your neuter singular nominative and your neuter plural nominative. And you also have to consider that when you're conjugating all of the endings in the first columns are going to be singular. So now we're going back to our chart here. All of the endings in this row or column are going to be singular, and all the endings in the second column, this one, are going to be plural. So I'll give you a sentence in English that we can translate, but before that, let's go ahead and finish off our chart and see how the ending matches the case, number, and gender of the subject, because see how all of these are in the nominative case, and we know it has to match the subject, so it must be nominative as well, because subjects are always nominative. And let's just go ahead and say, use the feminine. Let's say they want the feminine endings. And so we know that the ending has to match the case, number, and gender of the subject. So they have to give us the gender. But we know that it must be nominative because it must match the subject, and subjects are always nominative. And your first column will all be singular, and the second will all be plural. So let's go ahead and use amatus. But we know it's feminine, so it will be, let's look right here. It will be amata all the way down. Amata. But in this column, we know the subject is plural because it's a plural verb, so it will be amatai. And we just go ahead and copy it down there. So now let's go ahead and translate a sentence. I'll give you a sentence in English, and you can go ahead and translate it into Latin. And let me just say it's an example. And let's do the letters were sent. Okay, so we know that the letters is our subject, so let's go ahead. The dictionary entry that we're actually going to use is littera, litteri, feminine letters. So we're just going to make that litteri, and it's a first declension feminine noun. And since it is a third person plural, you're going to use sunt for your ending. For your form of sum. So you use sunt because it's third person, the letters, and it's plural because it's letters is plural. So literai sunt. Now all you need is a fourth principal part of a verb that means send. And we're going to use mito, mitere, misi, misum, which means to send. And we're going to go ahead and I'll just for now put down the fourth principal part, nothing changed that needs to be changed. And we know that literai is the subject, we know that it's plural, and we know that it's nominative, of course, and we know it's feminine. So we're going to have to use first and second declension endings to change that. And I'm going to do that in a different color so it stands out. Misai. So this whole thing is the verb, but this is the same case, number, and gender. Just this word is the same case, number, and gender as the subject. Okay, so it ends up being literai, misai, sunt. So see how the ending of the fourth principal part matches the case, number, and gender of the subject. Don't be fooled if you have a third, fourth, or fifth declension noun for a subject. Remember, as I say up here, you still have to use the first and second declension adjective endings. And before we finish, I just wanted to remind you that we always put the singular in this column, plural in this column. Just to reiterate, it's always going to be nominative, no matter what, your first word. We use the present tense of sum, and then we add our fourth principal part. And it also has to match the number and the gender as well. So with that being said, this was the perfect tense, active and passive. Let me know if you have any questions, and until then, thank you.